Jesus, he's our creator. He's our Messiah. He's the shepherd king, right? And
He's the gate.
he's the gate. Yeah. He's all he's asking is if we'll follow his lead, right? Will we listen to his voice? That's what he's saying in John chapter 10, certainly.
Yeah, and the voice comes through the prophets, right? Through his word.
Mhm.
That's what our study has been. That's why we're seeing this is all consistent, and it all hinges on the person of Jesus.
Yeah, in many ways, Micah is one of those hinge prophets. His message is one of those hinge points of everything. That there's this messianic shepherd king,
Mhm.
and that shepherd king is Jesus Christ. Welcome to Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. I'm Timothy.
And I'm Caleb.
And you're listening to Bible Discussions, the forum where we explore biblical topics that are relevant to your life. Today, we are continuing our series entitled, Who is Jesus Christ and Why Do I Need Him? And today, we're going to look at the Old Testament book of Micah, and we're going to see that God is like a shepherd king who comes to save his people. And then in the New Testament, we're going to explore that concept and see how Jesus is that good shepherd. So, Caleb, we're going from Jonah, one of the best-known stories in the Bible, and then we're going to switch now to Micah, a prophet that we don't really know very much about and nobody ever reads.
Yeah.
But there are a few clues in the text about who Micah is and kind of what's going on at the time of Micah. So why don't you, as the official Biblocus historian, give us some background on Micah?
Yeah, you're right. Jonah, in terms of the order of the books, is probably the last one that anybody's familiar with in the Old Testament, and all the rest of the prophets are like, I think I've heard of him.
Yeah.
So Micah 1:1 tells us the word of the Lord that came to Micah of Moresheth during the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, the vision he saw concerning Samaria and Jerusalem. So he gives us a nice bit of context there. Moresheth is a town of Judah southwest of Jerusalem. So it's going from Jerusalem's location towards the coast.
Yeah, they call that region the Shephelah.
Yeah.
It's like it's lower than Jerusalem, but it's higher than the plains. It's kind of like these rolling hills in between there.
So he had, in terms of the way he prophesied, he sort of stood apart from both Jerusalem and Samaria. There, it only mentions the kings of Judah that he served under, but he has a vision of doom for both Samaria and Jerusalem, for the northern and southern kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so Samaria was going to fall in 722?
Yeah. So
as we talked about before.
Yeah, based on the kings that he names there,
Mm-hmm.
his ministry was from about 740 to 686 BC,
Mm-hmm.
and so 722 is kind of in the middle of that. But he has an oracle for Samaria's doom, and then for Jerusalem's as well. Although Jerusalem's fall is not going to come until after his ministry.
Yeah, like 100 years later, right?
Yeah.
But what interestingly, during the time of Jeremiah, Micah comes up when I guess Jeremiah was about to be sentenced to death because he did one of his great temple discourses and he predicted doom for the temple, and that really got everybody upset because the temple was a sacrosanct, place that you couldn't say was going to ever go away because it was the presence of God.
That was kind of his point, right? He was like, you guys just do whatever you want, and then say, oh, we've got the temple.
Well, so God told him to go preach destruction for the temple, and so the people, the leaders didn't like that very much, and so we have in Jeremiah 26, verses 17 through 19, it says, some of the elders of the land stepped forward and said to the entire assembly of people, Micah of Moresheth prophesied in the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah. He told the people of Judah, this is what the Lord Almighty says, Zion will be plowed like a field. Jerusalem will become a heap of rubble, the Temple Hill a mound overgrown with thickets. Did Hezekiah, king of Judah, or anyone else in Judah put him to death? But did not Hezekiah fear the Lord and seek his favor? And did not the Lord relent so that he did not bring the disaster he pronounced against them? We are about to bring a terrible disaster on ourselves. So they directly quote Micah 3:12 there and talk about how Micah had prophesied that the temple would become a pile of stones. And so why are we mad
Yeah.
at Jeremiah for predicting the same thing?
Yeah, and Hezekiah, who was a righteous king, and a famous king,
Mm-hmm.
he respected Micah's prophecies. So, yeah, the argument there to save Jeremiah from the gallows
Yeah, yeah.
manages to come through in his case.
But
And that points out what we've been saying about prophecy, right?
yeah, that they call us back to covenant, right?
Yeah.
They call the people back to covenant. And that's what Mike is trying to do, like with his book. And that's what Jeremiah was trying to do. And in the case of Micah, in the time of Hezekiah, he was successful because Judah was pretty much destroyed, but Jerusalem itself, Sennacherib, I think, came all the way to the doors of, Tiglath-Pileser, I guess it was, came all the way to the doors of the gates of Jerusalem, but then he left. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, Hezekiah is saved there, spared for a time in the kingdom of Judah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to do a little outline of Micah because we're not going to read the whole thing, but it's the structure of the book is important to understand when you're reading it. And again, I'm going to borrow from Fee and Stewart How to Read the Bible Book by Book, which we've used on a couple of other occasions for outlines. It turns out that Micah is a series of 3 oracles of judgment, and they're coupled with a word of hope. So you have judgment, hope, judgment, hope, judgment, hope as you read through the book. And much like Joel, Micah uses the word hear or listen to introduce his different sections. So we'll see that in a couple of our examples that we read. So the outline, we'll just run through this real quick. In Micah 1:1 that we already read is the heading. And then in Micah 1, verses 2 through 16, that's the first series of threats against Samaria and Jerusalem. And it also has along with it the reason for those threats in Micah 2:1 through 11. And then in the second half of chapter 2 is the first word of hope. That's Micah 2:12 through 13. And then in Micah 3 begins the second series of threats and reasons. And then in chapters 4 and 5, you have the second word of hope. God's messianic king and kingdom is announced. And then in chapter 6, you have God's case against Jerusalem, the so-called the third word of threat, as Fee and Stewart call it. And then in Micah 7, verses 1 through 7, you have a lament that Micah writes, kind of a la Jeremiah style. And then in Micah 7, verses 8 through 20, when the book ends, that's the third word of hope. So that's kind of the structure of the book. That's your homework to go and read that. That gives you a kind of a outline to use as you look at those different segments of the book. So let's real quickly, Caleb and I want to look at what did Micah say was wrong in his time. And so that the first section we want to read is Micah 1, verses 5 through 7. It says, "All this is because of Judah's transgression, because of the sins of the people of Israel. What is Jacob's transgression? Is it not Samaria? What is Judah's high place? Is it not Jerusalem? Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of rubble, a place for planting vineyards. I will pour her stones into the valley and lay bare her foundations. All her idols will be broken to pieces. All her temple gifts will be burned with fire. I will destroy all her images. Since she gathered her gifts from the wages of prostitutes, as the wages of prostitutes, they will again be used." So you hear a lot in this first announcement, Caleb, in the first chapter of Micah, but primarily this distinction between Samaria and Jerusalem that was still around in the time of Christ when he spoke to the woman at the well. She asked him, "Hey, where are we going to worship in the future? Is it going to be here in Samaria? Is it going to be in Jerusalem?" Jesus was like, "Neither." But so that same age-old discussion was going on back here in Micah.
Right. Yeah. And, he's talking about high places and prostitutes, probably like shrine temple prostitutes, a lot of corrupt, perverted religious practices there.
Yeah, all the idolatry, the trappings of idolatry.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that was
and that's why the idols will be broken to pieces, and the temple gifts, and that's it's starting to lean towards that condemning the temple already.
Yeah.
He's not speaking of the height of Jerusalem, the Mount of Zion, as a holy place.
Well, we saw Jeremiah. We saw in Jeremiah where they quoted Micah,
right?
Where he does say that later on.
Yeah, it comes in even stronger, but you can see the sort of build up to that here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's sort of like we know that when Jeroboam the first set up the cultic shrines of Israel to keep people from going down to Jerusalem, he set up golden cows on purpose so that people would worship in the north and not go to Jerusalem when they were supposed to. And so I think this is kind of a statement against all of that. Like that was wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
The people of Israel should continue to go to Jerusalem, and that this was a sinful thing that they had done.
Yeah.
So, all right.
But then Judah as well. Like it says, what's Jacob or Israel's transgression? It's Samaria itself. But then even Judah, its transgression, its high place is Jerusalem. But it's not. It's not going to escape the condemnations either.
No, it's still it still should have been the place that the Israelites went to. Yeah. But at any rate, they were both had problems. So then we're going to jump into Micah 3, verses 1 through 2.
Then I said, "Listen, you leaders of Jacob, you rulers of Israel. Should you not embrace justice, you who hate good and love evil?"
So this is that same thing we've seen a lot of the minor prophets talk about, was social justice, people corrupting, their community, ripping off the people that they traded with or whatever. Yeah. Taking land. That's a big thing in Micah. We're not going to read about it, but taking people's land, because that was part of the inheritance that you had in the covenant, which is another way that Micah calls back to the covenant, is you're stealing people's land, and that's part of the promise of the covenant.
The covenant was for the promised land, with Abraham, and all the people were supposed to share in that. And so the wealthy and powerful and corrupt are extorting it from the poor.
Yeah, so we can look at ways that Micah's message is like other prophets we've already studied. So like he's similar to Amos in that he predicts the future failure of prophecy.
Yeah, if you recall Amos saying that there would be a famine of hearing the word of the Lord.
Yeah.
Because the people didn't want to hear it anyway. So in Micah 3, verses 5 through 7, this is what the Lord says. "As for the prophets who lead my people astray, they proclaim peace if they have something to eat, but prepare to wage war against anyone who refuses to feed them. Therefore night will come over you without visions, and darkness without divination. The sun will set for the prophets, and the day will go dark for them. The seers will be ashamed, and the diviners disgraced. They will all cover their faces because there is no answer from God." And this is like, he's saying that they're false prophets. They're fakes. Basically, if you feed them, if you you give them a gift, then they give you a good prophecy. If you're not, filling their pockets, and they give you a bad one. Yeah, and I think bellies. I think there's somewhere in here as well when he's listing all the transgressions where he says that the prophets like sell, fortunes, like fortune telling, basically, for a price, and judges accept bribes, and priests are corrupt. It's filling that same pattern like we've seen in some of the other prophets, condemning even the leaders of Israel themselves.
Well, and we said earlier that Jeremiah came about 100 years after Micah, and you can see his influence over Jeremiah again here, where it says they proclaim peace, and that was Jeremiah's. That was one of his big sermons that he gave. You say peace, peace when there is no peace, and so you can see the influence there here as well. So his message is also like Hosea's message that we looked at several weeks ago, declaring God's satisfaction with empty sacrifice. So in Micah 6, this is probably the most famous passage in the book of Micah, Micah 6, verses 6 through 8. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God.
So that should remind you of Hosea saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, right?
Yeah. And no superficial sacrifices. Yeah.
Yeah. Other places as well. I mean, David hits on a lot of these things in a lot of his writings. I specifically, just for one example, in Psalm 40, he says, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And this is not, this is consistent with with what we see in the Old Testament, with the prophets and the books of poetry.
Yeah. Yeah. A contrite heart, David said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, so now we've seen where Micah is just like Hosea. He's just like Amos. He's saying a lot of the same things we've heard in the other prophets, but that's not really what we want to focus on today. What we want to talk about is what Micah says the solution to the problem is going to be. And that is a messianic shepherd king is what he focuses on. So we're going to see that in several different verses in these oracles of hope that he has. So in Micah 2, verses 12 and 13, it says, I will surely gather all of you, Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. The one who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at their head.
Now remember that part about the one breaking open the way and opening the gate and going before them to lead them out. That's going to come into play later. But all of it, Micah is full of this imagery, this shepherd imagery. We were reading it in preparation, and Dad asked me what I thought the focus is or should be, and I was like, well, he talks a lot about shepherding. It seems, like a pretty strong theme. We were like on the exact same page with that.
Yeah.
It's rife throughout if you read the whole book.
Well, and it's interesting because during the course of Micah's ministry, all the northern tribes went into captivity. Mm-hmm. And here he's saying, well, all the remnant of Israel is going to be brought together. And then they're going to be led by this shepherd king. He's going to break them out of the pen and take them out to pasture. So, so it's an interesting concept, right? And he opens it up here in this first oracle of hope.
And then in Micah 4, verses 1 through 5, earlier we saw oracles against the temple, but here we're going to see, promises in regards to the temple. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and peoples will stream to it. Many nations will come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between many peoples, and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Everyone will sit under their own vine and under their own fig tree, and no one will make them afraid. For the Lord Almighty has spoken. All the nations may walk in the name of their gods, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. That's, if you watched our episode on the temple, that it was the whole purpose of it was to be a place of joy for all nations.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's happening here, right?
Yeah, finally this era of peace where nobody needs swords anymore, peace and joy. Everyone has their own food, everybody's taken care of. Everyone's being cared for by this mighty shepherd who's leading us all. So
right, and that theme where he says beating the swords into plowshares, that's another theme that we see in multiple prophets. Isaiah says that in Isaiah 2:4, and Joel says it in Joel 3:10. That's something else that Micah, this is picking up on here. It's a pattern throughout the prophets.
Yeah, absolutely. So continuing in Micah 5:1-4, it says, "Marshal your troops now, city of troops, for a siege is laid against us. They will strike Israel's ruler on the cheek with a rod. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely, for then his greatness will reach to the ends of the earth." So again, it's this messianic shepherd king who's going to lead everyone, all nations, in a time of peace and of strength and of plenty.
Yeah, and the connection to shepherd there is actually strengthened by the fact that it's mentioned that the Messiah comes out of Bethlehem, because that's the town of David.
Yeah,
That's where David grew up as, the son of Jesse, the youngest son who was ignored to just take care of the sheep all day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so and that verse there about talking about Bethlehem is probably also a candidate for the most well-known verse in the book of Micah.
Yeah, we'll see it gets quoted later.
So now we have this connection to David, King David. Of course, in the Old Testament, there isn't anybody greater than David to tie your kingdom to.
Yeah, probably not.
So then jumping into the last oracle of hope in Micah 7, verses 14-20.
"Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance, which lives by itself in a forest in fertile pasturelands. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in days long ago. As in the days when you came out of Egypt, I will show them my wonders. Nations will see and be ashamed, deprived of all their power. They will put their hands over their mouths, and their ears will become deaf. They will lick dust like a snake, like creatures that crawl on the ground. They will come trembling out of their dens. They will turn in fear to the Lord our God and will be afraid of you. Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance? You do not stay angry forever, but delight to show mercy. You will have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl our iniquities into the depths of the sea. You will be faithful to Jacob and show love to Abraham as you pledged on oath to our ancestors in days long ago." That's how the book ends, right? The final verse there is a reminder of the covenant.
Yeah, it's all the covenants.
Because he's a prophet, yeah.
Talking about Jacob and Abraham and
all of our ancestors
coming out of Egypt and everything.
And this goes so strongly with that theme, like we saw earlier, right? That I desire mercy, not sacrifice, like that idea from Hosea that Micah was echoing. And this again plays off of that. Right before this, in verse 9 of chapter 7, Micah says, "Because I have sinned against him, I will bear the Lord's wrath until he pleads my case and establishes my right. He will bring me out into the light. I will see his righteousness." And then it leads into that, he's talking about who is a God like you that pardons sin and forgives. You don't stay angry forever.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That verse 9 reminds me of Job, talking about even after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God. Like, it's such a confident hope in God's mercy and redemption. And it's go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and just the deliverance of the people from Egypt, as we looked at that story, how many times in the wilderness God was patient and forgiving and understanding of the people and all of their, foibles and problems.
Yeah, and it calls into question, again, your understanding of the atonement and the sacrificial system, right? The nature of our relationship with God. Is it legalistic? Is it strict rules and rituals? Or are we completely dependent on him? Because Micah says that it was God who will plead my case and establish my right. Well, what right? Like, because I sinned against him, I'm bearing his wrath, but God is somehow going to establish him as righteous? That doesn't make sense.
Well, it's a good thing you bring up, because it kind of leads to the misconception people have that God's whole purpose is just to punish us when we do wrong. But it's easy to miss for us when we read it, but at the beginning of this verse in 14, he says, you're going to shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your inheritance, which lives by itself in a forest in fertile pasture lands. Let them feed in Bashan. And Bashan, we talked about, with the cows of Bashan just a few weeks ago. We talked about how that was known as a rich pasture land, for raising, healthy cattle, and and he was comparing it to the wives of the leaders in Jerusalem, in Samaria. But here, it's not to be missed that the life that's being promised here is a rich, abundant, full life. Mm-hmm. It's not, like you said, if you take the blessings of the covenant, they blow away the curses every time.
Yeah, and it goes back to like what we talked about in Numbers, right? Or in Job, or in some of the other prophets, that like what God's doing here is pruning and purging, right? Mm-hmm. Not just punishing and destroying and being vengeful towards us.
Yeah.
Like he wants to bring us out of this, even if our skin has to be destroyed, as Job says. Like there's nothing left except, a husk, and God can still revive that and bring you into his righteousness out of that.
Yeah,
and that's like how the book of Micah ends.
Well, he shows that dichotomy too between people who trust in God and people who don't. He shows the thing about like people who go on their bellies licking dust all the time, like a snake, because they're living, the lousy life. They're not living the full rich life of rich pastures,
right? Yeah,
and so there's a difference. So the promises of God are amazing. Like when they came out of Egypt, it was, you're going to a land of milk and honey, a land you didn't have to work for, a land that's going to be given to you with great produce and all that. And so, so the promises of God so far outweigh, the downside of life is just disappears when you're enjoying the good side of following God.
Yeah. But that sometimes goes through, or that comes after going through like that purging process.
Yes. Yeah, that's true.
You have to burn off the, the sin and the parts of you that are not, not holy. Mm-hmm. And Micah talks a lot about a remnant, right?
Yes.
Mostly in the context of the remnant of Israel. We saw in, who was it? In Amos, right? Yeah. That the shepherd could save the remnant of the sheep from the mouth of the lion, like just a leg and an ear.
Yeah. And rebuild.
And Micah talks a lot about the remnant. There's actually a part in chapter 5 where he talks about the remnant of Israel being like a lion among sheep, among the other nations. And that this remnant, which we would think of it as being destroyed, it's actually it'll rise again, and it'll be something to be feared and respected.
Yeah, become the predator.
Spins all that. Yeah,
the prey becomes the
spins
predator.
it all around on its head, and it reminds me as well of in I think it was Amos. I'm actually drawing a blank now, where God was saying, because you, the corrupt leaders, like we were talking about earlier, the priests and the false prophets and the kings, because they like glean the people. They shove the other sheep out of the way, trample on the grass, and let them eat mud, and leave nothing for them. God's going to destroy the healthy sheep, and he's going to make his flock out of all the weak and sick sheep.
Yeah.
It's like this. It's an inversion of what you would think would be the case.
Yeah, the bullies are going to be punished, and the nerds are going to take
that
over.
was Amos, right?
The normies.
I can't remember who that was.
No, I think it was before Amos. I don't remember it myself. But
we talked about it right here.
Yeah, we did. We did. So, so the prophet, he's predicting a future Messiah who will lead us all back into covenant with God, which is what we said is the role of a prophet, a covenant enforcer, return to the covenant. So that's definitely what you're getting with Micah. Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be a shepherd king, just like David. Right? Mm-hmm. He's gonna gather the flock that's been scattered and lead them back to God. And actually, all the nations, as we saw, all the nations are going to come and say, "Let him teach us his ways."
Yeah. It's going to be the promised, land of all, and with the greatest leader. So that gets us to our Old Testament takeaway, which is that God will not leave his people defenseless. He will provide a shepherd king to lead them. So,
All right, now let's go to the New Testament. See if there's anything about a shepherd at all.
a shepherd king. I'm racking my brain, but let's read some passages and see if we find anything. Okay, so Matthew 2, verses 1 through 12. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother, Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So there's a direct quote of Micah 5:2, relating the predicted Messiah of Micah
coming from Bethlehem
to being Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to take this moment because we haven't done this since our first episode, I think, or second, or our real first episode 1, I think it was. We talked about what does the name Jesus Christ actually mean. And so remember that Christ means Messiah, which means anointed one. Mm-hmm. So this Messiah King from Micah, that Jesus Christ is that title that was added to his name by his followers when he was recognized as the Messiah. That's the Greek word for Messiah, Christ. And so he is the anointed one of God.
Right. And as Micah points out, right, talking about beating swords into plowshares, talking about false prophets proclaiming peace, but the Messiah actually bringing peace. All the nations come together under him. The Messiah is going to lead the world into a new era of peace, which is such a juxtaposition with what most of the first century Jews were expecting, this military leader to, punch Rome in the face.
Yeah. But we even saw in Micah, right, even in the Old Testament, that it was going to be a time of peace, not of war. So, so that's great. So now we read this passage last week in last episode, but I wanted to read it again in a slightly different context after having read Micah instead of having read Jonah, or was it Obadiah? It was Obadiah.
2 weeks ago, I think.
It was 2 weeks ago. So Matthew 9, verses 35 through 38.
Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field.
Yeah, so I wanted to read that because it's another one of these passages that says, first of all, that Jesus was compassionate, and he saw that the people were like sheep without a shepherd, and he wanted to provide that leadership for them. It's just that Jesus wasn't this messianic battle king like everybody expected, warrior king,
a warlord
that they thought of when they thought of David, but he's the messianic shepherd king. And his intention was to reach the entire world and bring the whole world underneath the peace of this kingdom. And so his approach to doing that was by picking 12 people and investing, deeply into those.
Right. It's interesting because this is not the Good Shepherd passage where he says, I'm the Good Shepherd. He sees the people helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And then he tells his disciples, we need more workers. Like he
Yeah.
doesn't just say, "Well, good thing I'm here and I'm the good shepherd." And we talked about that. That it's more effective to have, rather than every single person just has their own separate relationship with Christ. Our relationship with Christ actually involves our relationship with each other. And so we have leaders, that's why we talked about pastor and priest come from the word for shepherd.
Yeah.
So he's saying we need more shepherds. We need to raise up workers.
Because his idea was to get big, you have to get small. And he knew that investing deeply in 12 men, and even deeper in 3 of those, that he could have a bigger impact on the world than if he tried to reach everybody himself. And he teaches us to do the same thing. That's how he's the shepherd leader of us all, is he teaches us all to be shepherds. He teaches us all to take care of our flock. As in fact, what he says to Peter when he sees him after his resurrection, right?
Yeah, feed my lambs.
Take care of sheep, be a shepherd. And so we're all supposed to do that, and we're all supposed to take care of those around us. So he's going to do that through his body, through his church. And so the whole concept of discipleship is to stay small and then get big because of that, So here we are on the other side of the world again talking about it. So that does lead us, though, to the passage Caleb just alluded to in John chapter 10, verses 1 through 18. It's kind of a longer read, so bear with it while I read this to you. Very truly, I tell you, Pharisees, anyone who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in by some other way, is a thief and a robber. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they will never follow a stranger. In fact, they will run away from him because they do not recognize a stranger's voice. Jesus used this figure of speech, but the Pharisees did not understand what he was telling them. Therefore, Jesus said again, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father.
Yeah, so there's that reference to Micah 2:12 and 13, right? Talking about the gate and the one who will come to break open the gate for them and lead them out, right?
Yeah.
And Jesus says, I'm the gate and the one that leads them, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm the way and the truth and the life, yeah.
Yeah, he's going to lead us out into these rich pastures, that we were talking about in Micah, and a full life, he says, life to the full. And so we're going to live in peace. We're going to live in fullness and richness, under his leadership. That's what he calls us to.
Yeah.
Not all men beckon to his call, obviously, and we still have unrest in this world.
Right. But it's leading towards that peace, right? People of all nations around the world, not all people of all nations, but like Micah also was saying, all peoples are going to come to the temple. And we've talked about it, like in our temple episode, that the church actually is the temple. Like we are the temple of the Lord, because God dwells in us, and we're that presence to the nations.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna do a brief, callback to our whole series and say, well, Jesus says everybody's gonna know my voice. The sheep are gonna know the shepherd's voice. How will they know that? Well, I mean, just think of what we've covered. We started talking about how he was our creator.
Mhm.
So nobody knows us better than he does. Nobody can speak to us in our innate language, inside our hearts. Nobody knows us like our creator knows us. And then we've worked all the way through the Old Testament and seen all the characteristics and qualities of God that we've studied. And we got now to the prophets. And, we know the prophets are call us back to the way we're supposed to live, the way God made us to live, the way
Yeah.
he gave us in the rules of the covenant. And so they call us back to those things. That's why when we hear the voice of a prophet, we hearken to it, because it's calling us back to what we know is right. And so Jesus is the preeminent of all the prophets.
Mhm.
So, and he's our creator. So he's the creator prophet.
And it's not, speaking of our whole series, calling people, recalling the whole series. That's what every episode's been about. That the New Testament and Old Testament are consistent. That the message hasn't changed. The voice that's proclaiming it hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same message. It's the same covenant throughout.
Yes. Yeah. There's nothing new in the New Testament, as we like to say. And it's the same Old Testament message we've shared every week with you, every episode, trying to teach everybody, where did Jesus get these ideas? Well, I mean, he gave them to the prophets of the Old Testament, and then he's calling us back to them. So, like any good prophet, Jesus calls us back to covenant with God. So, cool things about Jesus, right? We've talked about like what his name means, and the name Jesus is the same as the name Joshua, right? And that means the Lord is salvation,
Right.
and the name Christ is the same as Messiah, which means anointed one. So
Right.
he's the anointed one who's calling us back to salvation,
Mm-hmm.
And so Jesus, he's our creator, he's our Messiah, he's the shepherd king, right? And
He's the gate.
He's the
Yeah.
gate, yeah. He's all he's asking is if we'll follow his lead, right? Will we listen to his voice?
Mhm.
That's what he's saying in John chapter 10, certainly.
Yeah, and the voice comes through the prophets, right? Through his word.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our study has been. That's why we're seeing this is all consistent, and it all hinges on the person of Jesus.
Yeah, in many ways, Micah is one of those hinge prophets. His message is one of those hinge points of everything. That there's this messianic shepherd king,
Mm-hmm.
and that shepherd king is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So that leads us
All right,
into
so
our New Testament takeaway.
Our takeaway: all who follow Jesus Christ, the messianic shepherd king, will be saved.
Yeah, because that's what his name means, right? The Lord is salvation.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're calling you with this episode back into covenant with your Creator, with the Messiah, with the Shepherd King, and he's calling you back, as it says in John chapter 10. You'll recognize his voice because he created you and he knows what's best for you. And when you hear his teachings, you think, that's the way I would like to be treated. That's the way I would like to treat other people. And that is what ushers us into this age of peace that Micah prophesied about.
Yeah, that's how we live life to the full.
That's right.
What he said he wants for the sheep.
Yeah, it's hard to live life to the full when you're busy fighting people with swords.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, that's the age that Micah's foretelling, and that's what we're offering to you. We pray that you would listen to this message and hearken back to your Creator, back into covenant with him. He's Caleb, and I'm Timothy. Thank you for listening to Bible Discussions on Biblocus, where the Bible intersects with your life. Please consider subscribing to our channel to help support our efforts. All scripture quotations, unless otherwise indicated, are taken from the Holy Bible, New International Version, NIV, copyright by Biblica Inc., used by permission of Zondervan, all rights reserved. This program is copyright 2024 by Timothy Klingerman. God bless all of you.